So today we're going to look at two different things, inequalities and interval notation. And the inequalities we're going to look at are called and or inequalities. All right. The first thing we're going to look at is the interval notation. Okay, so interval notation takes place of the open and closed circles that you've done in the past with inequalities. So when you're graphing them, rather than use open and closed circles, we're going to use brackets and parentheses. Okay, and this allows us to show not only on the graph what is happening, but also write it down as a statement in interval notation, all right, like you kind of see on the screen. So how this works, an open circle, which means that the answer is not included in your inequality, right, would be a parentheses. So open circles go with less than or greater than, okay? As for parentheses, those are going to be answers that are included in your answer for inequalities. And those would be for less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. So how we see this in our interval notation with graphing is we'll see a parentheses on 2, a bracket on 10. Notice the way they are facing in the interval notation is the same way you graph them. And then you graph in between the two things. Okay. Next, we have a bracket at -2, and for anything that is going towards infinity, you end it with a parentheses because infinity is not included in the answer, but you don't actually put a parentheses there. The reason you have a parentheses is because you can't actually show what infinity is. It's not really, it's more of an idea than an actual number. Okay, so then in this case, you're going to go graph your interval notation to the right, and it's going to just keep going with an arrow. Okay. Now in this case, we have this big U in there, in between the two interval notation pieces. All right, that's to show that there's a break between the two interval notations. So we have negative infinity to -3 with a bracket. So we're going to put a bracket at -3, and we're going to go towards the left with an arrow, and then we're going to put a parentheses around 3 towards infinity, and go to the right towards infinity with an arrow. Okay. So the interval notation in your graph should look similar. Next, we have -2 with a parentheses and 0 with a bracket. And notice they're facing each other, so you're going to just draw in between them. Then we have 3 with a parentheses and 5 with a parentheses. And again, because they're facing each other, you're just going to draw a line between them. Okay. So this would be interval notation. So when we're doing our inequalities, you're going to solve the inequalities, you're going to graph them, and then I'm going to write the answer of the graph in interval notation. Let's see how this looks. So here's our first equation, or inequality. Okay, so to write the solution in interval notation and graph it on a number line. So you should be provided with a number line. We're going to get to that in a little bit. First thing I want you to do is try to solve these. So you might want to pause the video, solve both these inequalities first, then start the video back up. All right, so here we go. If you solve both the inequalities, you get x is less than or equal to 1, or x is greater than 8. So let's take a moment real quick and talk about the and or the or. So in an or inequality, you have a situation. You're really a little bit hungry, but not starving. So you could have fries or you could have a burger. You don't want both because you don't want to feel bloated. You're just a little bit hungry, you want a snack. So it's fries or a burger. Either one would make you happy. Either one would satisfy your hunger, and you'd be good to go for the rest of the day. However, and you need both at the same time, and one hand in each. And you were stuffing your face because you need them both. So ands, you have to have both going on at the same time, or it could be either one. Okay, so if we go back to our problem here, here's our inequalities that we solved. So we have a bracket at 1 going to the left. We have a parentheses at 8 going to the right. Now in an or, it could be either one of these answers. Either one would make your inequality statement true. Okay, so how we write this is it's going from left to right as you read regular words on a page. So you'd go from left at negative infinity, and negative infinity would have a parentheses, to +1 with a bracket. Then you have the U sign. You start up again with a parentheses at 8, going to the right towards infinity, +infinity, with a parentheses. Okay, so this is what your answer should look like with the graph and the interval notation. Okay, so now let's talk about this same problem as an AND problem. Okay, this isn't on your sheet, but I just want to show you the difference between the two. And then, or it could be either one of them, and then as long as it answers one of your answers makes the inequality statements true, we're fine. But with an AND, it has to be both. So if we look at our graph again, okay, at what point in time do these two red lines overlap? Which is where you'd have both answers answering both parts of our inequality to be true at the same time. And the answer is, since it's an AND, where do they intersect? They don't. So in this case, if this particular problem was an AND problem, this would be a no solution. For AND problems, you need to see where the two lines are intersecting or where they're overlapping. Okay, and that part where they're overlapping, and only where they're overlapping, is the answer to your question. Okay. So if this was an AND question, again, it would be a no solution. So let's see what these look like and try some out. So again, here are your inequalities. Please take a moment, pause the video, solve both inequalities for x, and then come back. Okay, hopefully you've done that. You find out that in one case you have x is greater than or equal to 3, and x is less than or equal to 6. You'll notice in the second inequality, the sign has been flipped. The inequality sign has been flipped because we divided by a negative number. Okay, only when you divide by a negative number, technically you can multiply by a negative as well, will the sign flipped. Adding or subtracting doesn't change the inequality sign, only dividing or multiplying by a negative number. Okay, the other thing about these problems is, and we should kind of say this moving forward, I personally like to put my x values on the left-hand side, because when you do, you can use the arrows and the inequality signs to graph your inequalities on the number line. Okay, if you put your x's on the right or leave them on the right, if they're on the right, then you really can't follow the arrows. But if you put your x's on the left-hand side and change the arrows appropriately, you can always follow the arrows to graph your inequalities. With that being said, let's look at what the graph looks like. So we have a bracket at 3 going to the right. All right, we have a bracket at 6 going to the left. They're going to shade in between the two of them. Okay, because you're shading between the two of them and it is an AND, that becomes your interval notation. So we have bracket 3, comma 6 bracket. And that would be your answer. Okay, so again, we're looking for 3 to 4 different things on this. One, can you solve the inequalities correctly? So in this case, there's 2 of them. Did you solve them both correctly? Number 3, the graph, did you graph it correctly? And then number 4, did you put down the interval notation down correctly? All right, so move on. Next example is an OR question. So again, pause the video for a second, solve both inequalities for x, and then come back. So hopefully you've paused both videos. So if you solve them both, you're going to get x is greater than 1 or x is less than 3. So if we look at this, we're going to put a parentheses on 1 going to the right and a parentheses on 3 going to the left. And notice how they're going past each other. Now this is important because it's an OR problem. And you're looking for where they overlap, and they would overlap in between 1 and 3. But you don't care about where they overlap. You care about where they're going in general, okay? So in the AND, we stopped between the two parentheses because it was an and we're only looking for the overlap, okay? In this case, it's an OR. So it doesn't make a difference if they overlap or not, okay? So if you think about the answers, and it only has to answer one of the inequalities to be true because it is an OR, let's put in 0, okay? Is 0 greater than 1? Well, no. But is 0 less than 3? Well, yes. So as long as it answers one of the two inequalities as an OR, you're fine. You could do the same thing with a number on the other side of the parentheses. Let's pick 5. Is 5 greater than 1? Yes. Well, since it's an OR, that's all you need to know. It answered one of the inequalities correctly, so we're fine. So what does this mean for our absolute value, for our interval notation? This means that it doesn't make a difference what the number is, it's going to work. So that would be from negative infinity to positive infinity. Right? You can pick any number and it's going to work. All right. All right. Let's try another one. Again, pause the video and solve the inequalities for x. So hopefully you pause the video and you're back. All right. This is another example of what I mentioned before in the video. If you put your x's on the left-hand side, you can follow the arrows to graph this. All right. For the first one, if you add 1 to both sides, you get negative 4 is less than or equal to 2x. But then if you divide by 2, you get negative 2. So, but the x is on the right-hand side. So we're going to flip the whole problem around, and it's going to look like this. So x is going to be greater than or equal to negative 2, and x is going to be greater than negative 4. All right, you do the same thing with the other side as well. Notice in the second one where it says 3 is less than x plus 7, if you subtract 7, you get negative 4 is less than x. This still says negative 4 is less than x. It's just written the opposite way. Okay, you'll notice that the arrow is still pointing at the answer, and it's trying to gobble up the x. All right, either way. I just, again, like to write my x's on the left, so now I can follow those arrows when I'm graphing the inequalities. Okay, so if we start graphing this, we put a bracket at negative 2. All right, we graph to the right. Notice the arrow is pointing right, so I can graph to the right. For the other one, x is greater than negative 4, so I put in a parentheses at negative 4. And again, I'm going to the right. Now in this case, again, this is an and. We care about where the two lines are overlapping. All right, so between negative 4 and negative 2, there's only one red line. But after negative 2, there's 2 red lines. So we care about where there are 2 red lines that are overlapping. So in this case, we don't really care about the negative 4 to negative 2. It's inconsequential. Okay, we only care about negative 2 on. Now that graph for negative 4 is still there technically, but it's only being looked at where it does overlap, which starts at negative 2. Okay? So where the overlap starts is what your interval notation is going to be. So our interval notation will be at negative 2 towards infinity, and then we are done. All right, so please try the practice problems, all right, and then we can go over these at some point in time, and then make sure that we're understanding all the inequalities, and good luck.